If you're an Elementor user, chances are you've heard about the new container element that's in an experimental stage right now. You may also have dabbled with this. Today, I'm going to show you how to do it and use it the right way. How we can use this to reduce the amount of code that's going to be used on our sites and therefore ultimately speed up your designs. So let's take a look at what we're going to work with, and then let me show you how we can go about using it and why you may want to start using this yourself as opposed to using the converter option that is part of Elementor. Okay, let's take a quick look at what we're going to be using. So this is a test page that I've set up. Now, don't take too much notice of the design. It's basically just put together to demonstrate how we can use various different features inside this new container element. Very typical layout. You've got your navigation at the top. You've got a hero image. You've got some different sections showing the different services, the different whatever it is you want, and also another section down underneath. All typical kind of stuff, but the principles behind it is where we can use those to demonstrate how things work. So let's hop over into the page itself and take a look at recreating this from scratch. And also, like I say, why I don't recommend using the converter option when you're working with previous designs. Now, if you want to enable the experimental features for yourself so you can start testing the container element, all you need to do is go into the Elementor option. Doesn't matter if you've got dev or whatever. If you go into the settings inside there, you see you have an option called experiments. And all you need to do is make sure that you've got the Flexbox Container set to active. Once you've done that, simply hit the save at the bottom of the page, and then you are good to go. So now if we open up our page, you'll see under the panel on the left-hand side, we now have container, and that replaces all the previous ways in which we would have worked. Now, before we take a look at using this, let me just quickly show you why I don't recommend using the convert option. Let's go ahead and just insert a previously designed block. Now, this is just a normal block that's part of Elementor itself. Let's just find something like features, for example, and we'll say, let's grab this one. This will do. Because this is using the old way of building things out with your rows, your columns, your inner sections, and those kinds of things, we can convert this over to a new way of working. So let's click on convert. And now you see we get pretty much an identical duplicate underneath. If we take a look at the navigator on the right-hand side, which I will keep open during this tutorial, you can see the section at the top was the original way of doing this, where we've got columns, and inside each column, you've then got the various different components. If we open up the container, you can see basically what that's done is totally replicated it, but taking you away from these sections and just replacing them with the container. If we open them up, you can see each one of these has the image, the icon box, and so on. We don't always need to do that. So even though we would reduce a little bit of code by using the container element, we're not saving that much, but we can save more by using these the right way as opposed to falling back on this quick and easy convert option. So let me just quickly show you what I'm talking about. Let's just get rid of all of this and let's just start from scratch. So let's go ahead and add our first container. We can do this in a couple of ways. We can simply drag the widget over from the left-hand side, or we can click on the plus, and the plus will give us more options. You can see, like we've previously seen, we've got some starting points, but this is now all using the new container element. We can select a column, single column, or we can select a direction row, or we can have two columns and so on. Again, if we choose something like this two-column layout, you can see if we open up the options on the right-hand side, it basically just creates a container with two containers inside it. We don't always need that. So let's just remove that completely, and let's start off with a really simple example. We're going to be using, it doesn't really matter if we choose a row or column because we can change that anyway. Let's just choose this column as an example. So now you can see we simply have a column. This looks exactly like the section we would have had previously. However, we've got the items option, which allows us to control the direction, the alignment of the items, to justify the content and those kinds of things. So now what we can do is we can use normal widgets inside this single container, but we can position them inside that container to manage them in the same way we would have done using inner sections or nested containers. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's come back to our widgets, and we want two things inside here. We want the logo to go on the left-hand side and our navigation to go on the right. So let's go ahead and add that in. We'll add our site logo, we'll drop that into our section, and you can see if we look on the right-hand side, we've just got our container, and inside the container is the site logo. Let's go and do the same thing again now for our navigation. And we'll just grab this nav menu, and again, we'll drop that into the container. And again, you see now we just basically have this setup container with site logo and nav menu. If we take a look, you can see everything stacks on top of each other. So if we select our container, come back over to our items on the left-hand side, and we can change this to, for example, a row. And now you can see everything lines up in a row, whereas with a column, they'll go one on top of the other. If we want to have a reversed row, it will as his name suggests, reverse everything. So now our logo was originally on the left-hand side, now our navigation on the right, it's now the opposite way. And the same with the reverse column. You can see now our logo sits underneath our actual navigation. So we can use these kinds of things to our advantage. Let's put this back to a row. Now, with this being said, we've then got the align items, which allows us to align items, as its name would suggest. And you see these will change based upon whether we have a row or a column. So the align items in a row will allow us to have what's called flex start, so at the top. We've got flex center, or center, which will center align it, as the name would suggest. Flex end, which will sit it at the bottom of the container. And you've got stretch, which will basically stretch things out inside the container. You'll also notice that we've got the justify content that allows us to do things like flex start, center, flex end, space between, space around, space evenly. Now, I've covered these in more detail in their own video, which I will link in the description below. So if you want to have a kind of hands-on first look at how to get started and what all these things actually mean, check that video out because I go into a lot more detail. We're going to use it now in case of context. Now what we can do is we can go ahead and we can set these different items up. But we also got, if we come in and click on the logo, for example, and come into advanced, you see inside there we also have more options for aligning this, again, using the flex model. So we've got the align cell, flex start, center, end, and stretch. So this will basically allow you to manage the alignment of only the widget and not the entire column and the contents inside it. So we get a lot more control over exactly how everything is positioned on either a container level, containers nested inside containers, or on a widget level. So all these things together give us more control than we would have had previously with less code being used to align and lay out our items. Okay, so now we've gone over a little bit of theory. Let's see how easy it is to just set our navigation up exactly how we want it. Let's simply come over and select our container. Come back over to our layout option and open up our items at the bottom. Now we can use the options for the alignment and all those kinds of things to get this exactly where we want. So first of all, let's just make our container the size that we want. We want to set the height of this to 80. So you can see everything now sits where we want it to. But if it didn't, or we wanted to manage this in a different way, we can come into the items and we can control this. We might want everything aligned at the top. Well, just choose the flex start. Everything aligned at the bottom, as this name would suggest, at the bottom. Flex stretch doesn't really do anything in this example. Or the flex center will now position this in the center of our entire 80 pixel height. So things look already a lot neater and a lot nicer. Now we can use the justify content to control how things are spaced out inside here. So we can do things like center, which will center everything. We can do things flex end, so everything goes over the right hand side. The problem with this though is you can see our logo and our navigation are kind of stuck together. And yes, we could set the size of each of these different widgets, but we don't need to. We can simply use the space between option, and you can see now that will immediately align our logo to the left hand side, our navigation to the right hand side. So we've literally created one container, dropped in two widgets, and then just used some simple Flexbox alignment options to position horizontally and vertically and space things as we need them to. So now our navigation is basically completed very easily with minimal code being used. Now you may be asking yourself, well, what about things like, when you're working with mobile, responsive, those kinds of things? Well, don't worry, we'll come on to checking that everything looks good and making some adjustments a little later. Because again, we have full control over the direction, the align, the justify, all those different flex options are all controlled via desktop, mobile, tablet, and so on. So we have full control over the responsive layout of all these different options. So now we've done that, let's go ahead and just make our lives easier by using some just good housekeeping. Let's just change this container from container, and we're going to just change that to navigation. Doing this just makes the whole process of seeing exactly what's going on so much easier. And now we can kind of collapse that, but we've just simplified the whole process. So next up, we want to go ahead and create the next item in our design. If we flip back over to our test site, you can see this is our hero image. So we're going to go ahead and create that next. So one more time, we're going to come back over to our widgets, go ahead and add another container, or we can just use, like I say, the option from the main area. Let's do this example, just drag the container over. So we've now got a single container. Let's rename it, call this hero container. And what we're going to do is you can expand that out. You can see there's nothing inside there, and we have all the normal options. So first of all, let's go ahead and set the minimum height for this. So we're going to use the viewport height, and we're going to set this to 60% of the viewport height. We're also going to come into the style option, and inside there, we're going to set our background, choose a classic background, choose an image, and go and find the image we want to work with. For this example, let's use this nice red jellyfish image. We'll insert that in. And you see now we've inserted our image. We can go ahead and we can do any of the positioning options. So let's just do things like center to center, for example. You want to set this to be no repeat. Size, we'll just set this to cover. And if you want to, you can set this to be fixed. And then we can have it as a scroll effects, or we can just have it to scroll. For this example, let's leave it to fixed. We're going to go into the background overlay and we're going to set a background overlay inside here. We'll just choose a blackish color and we'll adjust the opacity on there to get what we want. Okay, about 0.6 is fine. So now what we've done is we've just created a normal, what looks like a section, but we've used the container. So nothing we haven't already seen. Let's go ahead and add some content inside here though. Let's go in and add a heading in. We'll drop that inside there and we'll add another heading in as well, which will pop underneath like we've done before. And if we take a look at the hero container on the right hand side, you can see we simply have the container and two text elements inside there. So what we can do now is we can select the container, come back into our layout options, come into items, and now we can use this to control exactly how things are laid out inside here, including the position. We can set up where they are in relation to the shape and size of it, those kinds of things. So first of all, let's go ahead and set our direction. We want to set this as a column so everything stacks on top of each other. So we'll set column and we can set the alignment for the items. So we can say we want this to be centered, for example, or we want it on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side. But for now, we'll leave that as the flex start. Now, you'll notice sometimes nothing is highlighted when you take a look at things like flex alignments because its default is the first option in that list. So if nothing is highlighted, you can take it as read that we're actually using the flex start. So you can see selecting it makes no difference whatsoever. So just assume if it's not selected, the first option is what we're defaulting back to. But now we can go ahead and we can position this with our justify options. So we can select that and now we can justify it to the center. So now what we can do is we can simply go ahead and style everything. Let's choose our first option. We'll apply some styling to this. Let's go ahead, change the text. And we'll do the same then for the subheading. And again, we'll just change the text. So we've created our heading section or our hero section. Now we can go ahead, we can select that, make sure a container element is selected, and we can adjust this by using negative margins like we've done in the past. Now, because we know we set our heading, or our navigation strip, I should say, to 80 pixels, we can just set this to a negative 80. So make sure everything is unlinked, and we'll just set our top to -80. And there we go. Now you'll notice our logo disappears, and that's easy to correct. We just need to set the Z value for whichever component we want. To make life easy, let's just select our navigation container, come over to our advanced options, and we'll set our Z index to 99. There we go. So you can see now our navigation is showing up where we want it to. We've got our information underneath. All our alignments are taken care of. But again, we're only using single containers and then using the flex model to position elements inside it. So these are relatively simple examples. Let's create something now that's a little bit more complex. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down underneath. We're going to go ahead and add in a new container. So we'll select the option for our container. We're going to set this to be a row because we want things to stack side by side. So we'll select direction row. Now we want 3 columns inside here. So we could just theoretically go ahead and create or insert 3 more containers inside this particular container. And that would work perfectly fine. But we want to stay away from doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back over to our widgets, and inside there we're going to do a search for the call to action. And I'll explain why we're using the call to action in a moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply drag this over into our container, and there we go. We've now set up our call to action. Let's go ahead and change our container name over. We'll call this CTA container. And what we're going to do is we're going to give this a bit of space. So we'll come into advanced and we'll just add some margins. And we'll put a 70 pixel margin top, 70 pixel bottom to give us a bit of breathing space. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and we can duplicate this call to action 2 more times. So let's just select that, we'll duplicate it, and we'll do the same again. So now you can see we've got 3 call to actions inside that container. And as you can see, it's automatically put them side by side because we set this to be a row. So now what we can do is we can adjust this if we want to. We can set our height on here. So we can come over, we can just go ahead into our layout, and we can set our minimum height. For this example, we're going to set this to 1130 pixels, and I'll explain why in a moment. So, okay, so you can see now, we take a look at the blue box. You can see we've got this blue box, we've got a huge amount of space underneath, and we've got this little blue section that shows us that each of these call to actions is taking up the entire space inside that initial kind of column layout. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and we can add whatever content we want. Before we do, let me explain why I use the call to action. You don't need to, but it's a quick and easy way of doing very common things. If we go back and take a look at our example, we've got an image, some text including a heading and a call to action button. Very typical layout for lots of different use cases. And you could easily create this with an image widget, with a heading widget, a text widget, and a button widget. But to do that, we'd have to group them together into a container. And then we'd have a container inside, and we'd have 3 widgets inside each of those containers. So 3 columns, pile of widgets inside there, all adds to a lot more code. Using the right kind of tools, which you can easily customize to look the way that you want, is a great way of cutting down on the excess code that you may need to use. So by using these over creating this from scratch with individual widgets inside containers, we just make a page that's going to be faster to load. We're going to use that example. So now we can go ahead, we can simply come in, choose our image, we'll insert that in. So now that we've chosen our image, we can now go ahead and customize all the different aspects of this. If you don't want the button on there, you can simply come into content, take out the button text, and that will hide the button. You can also go ahead, change this to different graphic elements. You can have icons inside here or nothing at all. So you can customize these to your heart's content. We'll set the title tag, for example, to something like H4, so it's a little bit lower down the stacking order. And if you want to add a ribbon in, you can do that. Then we can simply come to styles. Adjust our vertical position. We can adjust our height of our image. So we can modify this to get it roughly where we want it. Let's just say about 415 pixels. That's fine. The content, we can come in and we can just set any kinds of alignment and text options, all those kinds of things. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'll just go ahead and duplicate this now on the other 2 columns. Okay, so I've gone ahead now and I've set those 3 columns up. We've got now full control over exactly how these look and various different aspects. Now let's just say we wanted to change the look of this a little bit. We've got a lot of space inside here. You can see I made this box or this container much bigger. So if we select the container, we can come back over into our items and we can now go ahead and we can adjust things. So we say we want to put this in the center and that will center it inside that box. And to make life easier, let me just go ahead and set the box and just change the background color so we can see what's going on. Okay, so we can see we can position these as we want to, but we can also go in and position each individual widget separately. So for example, let's go and choose this center widget. We'll select that, come into advanced, and we now have the alignment options inside here as well. So we can say we want to flex end, and that will now push that down to the bottom of the container. You can see everything else still retains its position in the center. I can also do exactly the same thing with the third and final one. Let's select that one. And we can say what we want to do, go into advanced, and we want this to go right at the top. So we'll say align to the top, and boom, there you go. So you can create more unique, okay, this admittedly looks rubbish, but you can create more unique layouts simply by using the positioning inside here as well. We've also got great options. So if you come back in and select this, if we wanted to flip this the opposite way, so we just wanted to duplicate this, maybe change a couple of bits and then flip the design, which is a common thing to do, you can simply select the entire container, come back over to your layout, go into items, and we can set this to be a reversed row. And boom, every aspect of this has now been reversed. Not only the widgets, but also their positioning inside that container. So you can see by using the combinations of these different tools, you can get really creative in how you want things to be laid out. Now for ease, I'm going to set everything back to what it was. But what I'm going to do is going to set these back to be in the center, and we're just going to make this entire section just a little bit smaller. Around 800 looks fine. Okay, so everything looks perfectly fine on here. Let's update this. And now let's switch into responsive mode so we can check out what this all looks like on a mobile. So let's switch it over. Go to responsive mode. Let's switch this over to tablet. And you can see most things look okay, but it still needs a bit of refinement. But everything is still working in the same way that we saw. So now what we can do is we can simply come over to, for example, our header section, come open our navigation app, grab our site logo, and we can go ahead and we could just make a bit of space on this. So let's unlink these, go to the left-hand side, put 30 pixels of spacing in there. So now that our logo's been taken care of, let's go ahead and take a look at the navigation over on the right-hand side. So you can see now that's been changed over to be a hamburger menu. We can select this, and as you can see, it's only taken up a very small portion of the overall space that it has. We can rectify that. Now, this will grow as more content appears and disappears in there. But if you want to have more control over this, there's some extra options we can use with the Flexbox model. So let's select this. Let's come over to Advanced. And inside there, you can see we've got options for size. Now, at the moment, this is set to none. So it will just basically occupy a small amount of space, basically. I don't want to go into too many technical details. What we can do is we can set this to grow. So that's now grown to take up the available space. we can go ahead and we can adjust that. We can set it to shrink if we want to, and that will shrink it back down. Or we can actually set a custom value inside here. We'll leave this set to grow, and you'll notice the problem we've got now is that our navigation, because it's set to be sat in the middle of that kind of space that it takes up, that flex container space that it's got, we need to push it over to the right-hand side. To do that, all we need to do is select the widget itself, come back over into our content section, and inside there you can see we've got toggle align. We're going to set this to be right. And then all we need to do is add a little bit of margin around that as well. So we'll uncheck those options, go to the right and set 30 pixels inside there. So we balance off the left and the right hand side. So next up, we need to deal with the hero container. As you can see, things are pushed up against the side, which doesn't look great. So what we need to do is make sure the hero container is connected. We're going to come over to the padding option, unlink those options inside there. And we're going to set 30 to be left and 30 to be right. That now pushes things over. And if we wanted to, we could adjust the sizing just to deal with all this. The third and final thing we need to do is deal with the container for our sort of call to action section. So again, we can just grab the container, come over to our advanced options, come into padding and set our left and right inside there as well. So 30 left, 30 right, and everything now looks considerably better. So everything is looking pretty good on our tablet. Let's switch over now into mobile. And you can see we can go ahead and make sure everything looks great in there. And again, all the options we set up will flow down. And if we need to make changes, we can do that. So we might want to change the alignment. You can see this is picking up center, which is perfectly fine. Now, as we can see, our call to action container looks a little bit wrong. So we need to address that next. Easiest thing to do, first of all, is select the container, come back over to our layout, back into items, and this time switch this over to be a column. And what that will do is it'll mean that each of these different call to actions will stack on top of each other. And the nice thing with this is when you switch back to tablet view, it switches it back to a row. Switch it back to desktop, stays as a row. Switch it over to a mobile, switches back into a column. So we can use these to very easily adjust the layout of things with no faffing about. Very easy to do. And again, if you wanted to, you could reverse these as well. So we can reverse the order of everything. So now we've set up stacking them on top of each other. The next thing we need to do is make sure they take up the right amount of space. So now to deal with that, all we need to do is go ahead, select the first call to action, hop over into advanced, and inside there you can see we have a width option. We can choose custom, full width, inline, all those kinds of options. So you can choose full width. And as you can see, that now fills things out exactly as you want to. And you can see if we scroll down, we just need to repeat the same process for the next one. And if you needed to add any spacing around the actual container itself, you can simply come into the container, open up advanced, and then set any margins you want inside there. So it's very easy to do. Just going to simply come over to this one, go to width, choose full width, and the same for the third and final one, select it, full width. So we've now created a layout that works across all the different kinds of devices, tablets, mobiles, and we've cut things down into a very small amount of content, therefore cutting out a lot of the code that's being used. This should give you a good understanding now, a good basic foundation in how you can use the container element and Flexbox model in Elementor moving forward when this becomes a thing. And hopefully it'll also show you that you don't need to rely on this convert option, because that is still going to add in extra code where it's not needed. Even though you're going to use the container instead of inner sections and sections, it is adding things in that are not always going to be needed. As always though, I'd love to get your feedback on what I've covered in this video. Have you learned something? Is this giving you the confidence to get stuck in and start experimenting with the new container element in Elementor? Let me know in the comments section below. As always, all the applicable links are in the description. My name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.